So as I mentioned earlier on, historically, there have been, as we look back on it now, lots of good intentions with mission work, lots of positive things achieved through mission work. But there was a period in our history, and perhaps not that long ago, still in our history, where the sort of white saviorism, the great white hope idea of mission work tied in alongside colonialism to leave perhaps a negative impression of the church and of the gospel for many people around the world. How do we respond to that in this day and age? How do we deal with that in this day and age? And how do we take that on board when it comes to cross-cultural witness in our everyday lives? Well, joining me to explore this is someone who's been giving it a bit of attention and a bit of thought in recent days. He is the Reverend Jose Laussu. He is from the Langham Partnership, and it's an area of interest for you, Jose, not least because of your own heritage, your own experience, your own history.
That's absolutely right. Thank you for having me. The issue of the missionary enterprise is obviously to be seen within its historical context before we seek to apply it in our contemporary context. And turning back the clock, colonization coincided with the arrival of the first missionaries, particularly in the continent of Africa. And it was so through the expeditions the Portuguese were championing historically when they arrived in the coast of Angola and South Africa and Cape Hope, Cape Town. And before they even moved inland, they built cities along the coast. And the first missionaries, of course, arrived from the coasts. They intended to go inland and established mission stations, and mainly the work of evangelization, the building of schools, and health projects and clinics and hospitals were built. That was grand. However, it was primarily the Westerner taking dominion over the conquered territories, which intended also to foster imperialism.
And that was the sort of main problem, that you had this dichotomy between what was genuine desire to help people improve, in inverted commas, their lot, to bring education, understanding, and also a message of around health and of issues of health and medicine, and a message of spiritual health. And so the intention was good. But when we look back, what was the fundamental problem? That there wasn't an understanding of the need to respect the individuals that we were, in inverted commas again, going to?
I suppose the good intentions, the pure intention to evangelize, was marred by colonialization, right? Colonization aimed at viewing at another person, not through the lenses of being fellow image bearers created in the image and likeness of God, but rather a superior individual reaching out to somehow a lower caste of individuals. And therefore, the whole narrative of proclaiming the gospel was somehow in chaffed waters, and therefore those first missionaries were somehow forced by the colonial powers, which they somehow criticized. However, they too were forced to use some sort of paternalistic approach in their missional enterprise.
And what impact did that, and does that still have, in the minds, the attitudes of the churches that were built out of this history? I mean, does that sort of white saviorism, that sort of great white hope mentality, because so many missionaries came from Europe and carried that sort of white privilege message with them. Does that still impact in those churches that are now independent, self-governing, self-functioning churches?
There are obviously great areas of growth, of development, but the antagonism between the mission and the church seems less intense. There are churches that are fully independent, autonomous, and the three selves you mentioned there, being self-supportive, propagating, right? The churches are themselves expanding. But also we need to include our third aspect, which is self-management, where the church has its own leadership structure and does not depend from a foreign mission to dictate a vision on the church. A fourth one that could possibly be helpful to include is theologizing, how the local church can themselves look at scripture and scriptural hermeneutical tools to contextualize those truths to their own context. But also we have some sort of a generational gap. Older believers still bear the memory of the former pattern of partnerships, where it was all about the giver and the receiver. It was all about the donation and the money. However, there is a younger generation, and majority of this, a large portion of the younger generation did not have a first-hand experience of these transactions. And so therefore the church is growing, and we cannot deny the growth that we see, the tremendous growth we see in churches in the continent of Africa, South America, Latin America, and in Asia. However, it has been encouraging to see these signs of growth. We should not be satisfied with the numerical growth, but we also need to look at the spiritual growth, particularly in reaching out to their own communities.
But has there not been a change in attitude about that sort of transactional element of, the help coming from Europe and so on to make a difference for those who are struggling? I mean, when I talk to aid organizations and when I talk to organizations that work with the persecuted church around the world, again, I hear them say, we need to recognize that this is not us going, condescending, bringing help, but there is actually a relationship element where those who are able to give financially, for example, find themselves also enriched culturally and spiritually by the return conversation. It is now, is it not, more of a conversation, more of a relationship, more of a thing of mutual respect around resources and around the understanding of culture and what that can bring.
Essentially, as you rightly said, the dynamic of language in this relationship ought to change. Where in the past we spoke of transaction, it shouldn't be transactional. The relationship is actually transformational, where we look at one another in equal footing and the playing field is leveled, and a partnership that is informed by mutuality. Unfortunately, the resurgence of a variety of concrete problems, including colonial anachronism, that is, colonialism happened before, and the question is, why is it happening now? When we look at social inequality, the disproportionate distribution of wealth and healthcare, the emerging threat of global environment decay, dictatorial regimes in the continent of Africa and elsewhere, the ongoing problem of racism in our world continue to make partnership working more and more difficult. I alluded to the many growth and areas of improvement. However, we need to move from territorialism to proper partnership, a partnership that's informed by mutuality. It's not about the West going about solving the problems of Africa or of Asia, but rather interpreting those needs together. What are the needs and how can we participate in this work of mission together? I think that level of togetherness, of unity and collaboration is very much needed.
And of course, that is something that the Langham Partnership, which you work for and you're a part of, is currently working on. But I wonder if we could, just as we draw our time to a close, to think about the message, the understanding, the experience that you are highlighting here. How does that then work, and how should that shape our desire for cross-cultural witness here in the UK, in our everyday lives, our everyday experiences? What do I, as a middle-aged white man, need to take on board when I am endeavouring to share the hope of my faith with those of other cultures, other faiths, other experiences?
That's an interesting question. In practical terms, this is not something new. There have been many discussions, many conferences and conventions where this very issue was discussed. And think about Lausanne commitments that were laid out, not only back in 1974, but moving forward. The Panama Statement of 2009, where John Stott was influential there and said, we will take, the whole church will take the whole gospel to the whole world. So the idea of understanding lostness or the hidden is not something that is only found in other territories. Around the corner and around the world, a soul needs Jesus.
Yes.
So mission is mission locally and globally. And so within the UK, we need to rise to the occasion and realize that verbal proclamation of the gospel, involving ourselves in integral mission and embracing issues of social justice and advocacy, this is something that you and I can do right at our doorsteps. And we should encourage one another to be involved in the task of mission at home and abroad.
Yes, don't shy away from it, don't hide away from it, but approach it in a way with a servant heart and with a respectful ear, and then we will walk the right path. If you want to find out more about the work of the Langham Partnership, uk.langham.org is the website, uk.langham, langham.org. Take a look at it for yourself. Jose, lovely to speak to you today. Thank you for joining us.